So my name is Foluke Adebisi, and I teach at the Law School University of Bristol, and I've got quite a sort of a long-term interest in African history. So that usually comes up in my writing. There are a lot of Nigerians who have no interest in African history, but I studied history in secondary school, and there were only 4 of us in my class who studied history. And when I went to university, I also studied a unit in African history. So it's just something I've been, very much interested in. It's probably because of my grandfather, because he was also interested in history, so he used to talk to me about history a lot. Okay, my first hero figure is Queen Amina of Zaria, also called Queen Amina of Zazzau. Okay, so she lived in the 14th century, or 14th or 15th, it's not exactly clear, and she ruled Zaria for 34 years, and she was a warrior. She was a warrior princess, and she went to war, ahead of her troops, which was, which we would consider to be quite unusual. So she had a very large army, and she conquered lands very far away from her. So she, as far as Nupe, Kwarafa, which is it's quite a long distance, very difficult to say in terms of miles, but it was a very large area of land which she conquered. And she refused to marry because she thought that if she got married she would not be able to go to war, so she had no children. She built the walls of Zaria, so that's kind of like her legacy. The walls of Zaria are still standing till today, and she made Zaria very, very rich, so it became a place where other countries, well, nations, paid tribute to Zaria at that time. And so there's this program on American television, Xena Warrior Princess. Yeah. Apparently that is fashioned or was inspired by Queen Amina. So, and then there are roads and schools, like secondary schools, named after Queen Amina. So she is quite a very important figure in the north of Nigeria. I think it depends on, sort of the sector of society. Zaria would probably, she would be quite popular in Zaria because Queen Amina's walls, some of them are still standing. So if you say those are Queen Amina's walls, you may not know much about her, but you know Queen Amina. But in the south of Nigeria, for example, Queen Amina is not that popular because there's no monument, or she's not remembered in any way, and because the study of history is not compulsory in Nigerian schools, I think inevitably her legend may die out. Because if you watch Xena, Warrior Princess, it's not, your first thought wouldn't be that's Queen Amina of Zaria, unless you're told. It's quite important. I think we have this idea, African women especially, we have this idea of the traditional African woman, and it's based on a fiction, it's a fantasy, it doesn't exist. If you could have Queen Amina as someone who existed in the 15th century, and men followed her into war, and now we're thinking about, you have situations in which men refuse to speak to women without their husbands present, in the same area of Nigeria. It doesn't make any sense. So I think it's quite important that women know who they are and who they can be. Because I think that is in itself, a limitation. Because if you're talking about things like women empowerment and women's rights, on the one hand, I do think we need to talk about oppression, so who's doing the oppressing, but we also need to talk about, people who need to self-actualize. And you cannot self-actualize if you're limited in your thinking. I think legends like that of Queen Amina tends to tell us that we can be what we want to be, as long as we can visualize it. I think she's human, and I think the problem with trying to demarcate ourselves into, different regions and countries and societies and races, it limits the possibility of humanity anyway. So I think everyone should study Queen Amina. But what I would, sort of be cautious about is sometimes the way in which legends which belong to particular people are then revisualized to, so say for example, Bidika, you then try and refashion Queen Amina to sort of be closer to Boudicca just to make her presentable or acceptable. I wouldn't, want that, because I think everybody's experience is valid. So I think she would be well received if she's presented as she was, and warts and all, because there are some stories about her which are not very nice. I mean, she was a warrior, so she obviously killed lots and lots of people. So, but I think she should be presented as she is. I think we're a little bit too quick to try and make saints of our heroes, and this is why I said earlier that I'm not sure I would call these people heroes, but then it's because of the way in which we fashioned that word heroes. Heroes are just people. So trying to say that she has to have done everything right, that is illogical. So there would be some things that she would have done which would be more in keeping with the century in which she lived. And there would be some things which she would have done which could happen now and which would not be good, but just because she's a warrior and she's gone to war, killed people, she refused to marry, she made her own choices. The fact that we study someone and we, in other words, revere them, doesn't mean we have to replicate their life. We have to take the lessons of history. And the lessons of history, at least the one lesson I take from Queen Amina is that a woman can go to war. At least that's not the only lesson, but it's, being a woman is not a limitation to being a warrior. The fact that she went to war in a time when we consider, traditional women as very docile and complacent, I think it's quite important for us to remember that there were women in the past who do not fit with this sort of false assumption that African women are silent and lack agency. So I think that's one of the reasons why I've chosen her. Okay, so my secondary school textbook, school certificate, History of West Africa, AD 1000 to 1800. So it basically quotes the Kano Chronicle, which was written by one of the colonizing officers. So this section is about Zaria itself. So it's a brief history of Zaria, and it quotes, like I said, the Kano Chronicle, which records that at this time, so this is about 1400s, Zaria under Queen Amina conquered all the towns as far as Kwararafa and Nupe. Every town paid tribute to her. The Sakin Nupe sent 40 eunuchs and 10,000 coolers to her. She first had eunuchs and coolers in Hausa land, and her conquest extended over 34 years. In her time, the whole of the producers from Zaria were brought to Hausa land. It is claimed. So the second one is Efushetan Anihura. So she was a very rich woman. She's an Egba woman, but she moved to Ibadan. You may know that Ibadan is quite a relatively new Yoruba town. It was established in 1829. You may have heard of the Yoruba civil wars. So after the Fulani Jihad, the Oyo Empire sort of fell in on itself. So there were lots of civil wars. So those fleeing the civil war, some of them founded Abeokuta. So Abeokuta is a town under the rock, and others went to Ibadan. They're quite sort of new and similar towns, both Abeokuta and Ibadan. So Efushetan also moved to Ibadan around this time. So she became the Yalude of Ibadan, which is basically the queen of the women. So it doesn't translate well. The Yalude just means like the most important woman in Ibadan at the time. So all the governance or political decisions would be passed through the Yalude. She was extremely rich, and if her name Efushetan Anihura, because this was at the time when there were no surnames. So the surname given to you sort of is actually more descriptive than an actual surname. So has Anihura means rich person. So she She had one daughter, and her daughter died when she was having a child. So from that point, Efusheton's story became quite different. So it is believed by lots of academics writing now, so people, academics writing about Yoruba history, sociology and anthropology, they think that she suffered from depression. But obviously this is, she lived in the 19th century, so it was prior to any discovery of any mental health issues. So she became extremely wicked. So after her child died, she started taking her depression out on her servants, especially anyone who got pregnant, because her child died in childbirth. So she became extremely wicked. And the other thing, so the Areono Kakanfo, which is sort of like the warlord of Ibadan people at that time in Ibadan, was Latosha. Now Latosha, because she was very rich, he wanted to go to war and he needed her support. Obviously, she's very rich. So she refused to support him. So she'd been doing lots of things, like actually killing people. She had had a number of people beheaded, and also refused to support Latosha the Areono in his war efforts. So obviously her popularity had died down at the time. So he came back from the war and he was really upset with her, and she refused to go and sort of greet him at the walls of Ibadan when he came back from his war efforts. So he asked for her to be killed, but because she was the Iyalode of Ibadan and the rules were you could not actually execute a woman, he had to employ someone to kill her, but he removed her as Iyalode of Ibadan. And she was killed, she actually was killed, or she died on the 30th of June 1874. So, because like I said, she was from Egba, so the people of Egba came to ask the Areono to explain how she died. And this was, they found a way around actually accusing the Areono Kakanfo, and they executed those he sent, and her riches were sort of given back to the Egba people. Her life story has been written into TV dramas. There was one by Ishola Ogunshola. There's a sort of they are a drama group. So there was an old one which wasn't properly recorded because it was done in the 80s. So there's a new one, and you can actually see it on YouTube. Among the Yoruba people, Efusheton is quite well known. And I think my reason for including her is mainly because she suffered from depression and it wasn't treated as such. And I think it should highlight to us the fact that depression should be recognized, mental health should be treated, as quickly as possible, and still isn't in Nigeria. It's one of the I think one of the failings of the health service is that, and not just the health service but the society as a whole, failure to recognize mental health issues and not taking them in hand as quickly as possible. Because what you see here is a spiraling out of control, and then this leading to her death, and also death of other people, because the Areono was upset with her, but he was mainly upset with her because she could not handle real life anymore because of her depression. So I think it's quite important, and on that one hand. On the other hand, the fact is that she was really important as a woman in the 19th century. This was just before Ibadan became an English protectorate. So she was really important to the success of a war effort. And I think that is also an important thing to, significant thing to remember when we study history of, Nigeria and Africa generally. So I don't think it was the shame of it, that I don't think there was any shame attached to it. If she had had more than one child, I think she would. So if there was any shame, it was because she had no children left. Okay. So it's not because her daughter died that there would have been any shame, but because she had only one child anyway. And if there was any shame, the shame would have been, well, you only had one child and the child died. But I think it was, I'm not sure about the numbers, but there is some suggestion that around that time was almost like a 50% chance of dying in childbirth. So it wasn't unexpected. It's just you kind of don't think about it. And it's like the circle of life, isn't it? You think, well, you can have a child, nobody thinks the child would die. I mean, maternal mortality is actually still, I would say, relatively high in the UK as well. It's not massively high, but considering, that you've got the NHS, and the NHS, like, my own opinion, is wonderful. People still die in childbirth because it's childbirth. You are basically dicing with death. So if you have, in Nigeria, there are people who say they can't have their children in hospitals. So they go to religious places to have their children. And if you've got any complications before you can get yourself to a hospital, so not only are we talking about an infrastructural limitation, but also a limitation of knowledge. You have to go to the right hospitals, and then you have people who have children sort of every 9 months. And that is, a problem, because even where you educate women and say, well, don't have children every 9 months, are you educating their husbands? Their husbands actually listening. So there are lots of problems, and not just the infrastructural problem to be solved there. And I think, the story sort of brings that to the fore. Well, I think she, according to the story, she beheaded a number of her female servants who got pregnant. So then she wouldn't say, oh, you got pregnant, I behead you, but they would, suddenly become irritating. She would be irritated by them, and then she would say it was something else they did. But it was quite obvious to people that it was, from the moment that person got pregnant, it was kind of their death warrant had been signed. I think Efusheton's story is really important in the sense that it's a snapshot. So rather than trying to summarize, okay, or your empire looked like this, if you've got a snapshot, it's easier to relate with, because we're talking about real people with problems that are recognizable now. So a lot of the history books you read, you've got, this is how the empire was organized, and these were the sort of chiefs, but how do you relate with that, especially if you're reading it either as an African in diaspora, somebody who's not African at all? You cannot relate with that, because all you see is a different nation with a different political system which is not being used now. If you read Efusheton's story, you've got things which happen now. People still die in childbirth. People still, are rich. People have depression. But it happened way back then. So I think a person's story is easier to connect with history. So this one is written by Reverend Samuel Johnson, the Reverend of Oyo, and don't be deceived by his name. He was a Yoruba man, but because he was a Reverend, he's got English names. So this book was published in 1921, so it's out of print. However, digital copies are available for free online. So it's called The History of the Yorubas from the Earliest Times to the Beginning of the British Protectorate. It's a very, very good textbook. It's long, but it's very, very good. So it covers everything that is known about Yoruba history from, well, the beginning of time, really, to just prior to colonization. And it was published in 1921, so it's out of copyright. So Latosha, the Ariel Kakafo, at the commencement of his administration, ruled with great clemency. But after this successful expedition, he began to show himself as a Kakanfo with all the characteristics of a Kakanfo. Obstinacy, recklessness, and bloodthirstiness. It's, basically summarizes what, because Ariel Kakanfo is the sort of the Lord of War of Ibadan at the time. Okay, my third figure is Moremi Ajaso of ile-ife but born in Offa, because my friend said if I don't say she's born in Offa, then she will not be my friend anymore, because my friend is from Offa. So Moremi Ajasoro or Ajansoro, it depends on, they mean the same thing. She lived in the 12th century, so this is going way back. She was born in Offa, but she moved to ile-ife. Now ile-ife is like the spiritual home of the Yoruba people, and it's believed that she was married to Oromiyan. Oromiyan was one of the sons or grandsons, because again legend makes that it's not too clear. Oromiyan was one of the sons of Oduduwa, and Oduduwa was the founder of the Yoruba people. So Moremi was married to Oromiyan, and she lived in ile-ife. So at that time, the people of ile-ife used to be sort of invaded by these sort of masquerades and scary looking people, and they would plunder the town and take people captive and burn down houses. And at that time, people of ile-ife believed that the gods were angry with them, because the people who came to attack them looked like masquerades. So Moremi decided that she was going to be captured to find out where and who these people were. So she told that next time they come and invade, everyone should hide, and she's going to stay out in the open so that she will be captured. So she gets captured, and it turns out that the people that come to invade them are from Igboho. Some people recall that as Igbo, but it's not. They're actually captured by another Yoruba town. So she got to Igboho, and she got, again, because apparently she was exceptionally beautiful, she got married to the leader of the Igbohos. And she asked them, so how do you, what do you do to make yourself so fearsome? And he says, well, we dress ourselves in raffia palm. So this is just dried palm fronds, and they use it to make a garment. So cover them from head to toe and make a lot of noise. So it seems as if they're spirits rather than human beings. So when she finds this out, she goes back to ile-ife and tells them, well, these are not spirits, these are just human beings dressed in raffia palm. Next time they come, get lots of palm oil and open, sort of like fires and attack them. So that's what they do. So that's what they did. So they managed to attack all the invaders, and that was the last they heard of that invasion. So she's sort of remembered as a person who saved ile-ife from constant invasion, and that's why she's called Moremi Ajasoro, because Ajasoro means this person who ends the troubles. So there were no surnames in that time. And like I say, she's very, very well remembered in ile-ife and in Offa as well. So I grew up about 25 minute drive out of Offa. So there's sort of buildings named after Moremi, and ile-ife was where I went to university. And there's a hall named after, so a student hostel named after Moremi, and I lived in that hostel for 3 years. So every morning I would pass in front of a statue of Moremi, and there's a much bigger statue at the Oni's Palace in the center of the city itself of ile-ife, which you can go and see if you want to visit ile-ife. There's also a student hostel in the University of Lagos called Moremi Hostel. So she's very well remembered in Yoruba land, at least. I think so, because the first time I heard of Moremi, because funnily enough, we did not study her in history. So she wasn't one of those because we studied Queen Amina in history. But the first time I heard of Moremi, I was in primary school, and we put on a play, one of Zulu Sofola's plays. And one of the characters was, so the play itself was an exploration through history. So it was called The Quest, I think. So one of the characters was Moremi Ajasoro, and there was a song about it. So it's stuck with me, sort of, because there's so many instances in which she comes up, and you know, she's really regarded as someone who was fearless and who was willing to sacrifice anything to save her people. And I think that is, you know, quite remarkable. I think, you know, because like you say, she's innovative, and I think that's very much my experience of Nigerian women, especially Yoruba women, is that, you know, if there's a problem, the solution, you know, there has to be some solution somehow. We will find it. And I think being called a warrior is too simple to actually define, you know, that kind of African womanhood. It's more about being, you know, being fearless, but also being, you know, thinking smart, thinking out. I think for someone like Morimi, the box was not really in consideration. So you're not thinking outside the box because you haven't boxed yourself in anyway. So you're thinking, how can this problem be solved? I will get myself captured. Who does that?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's, yeah, her story is fantastic. There may be some embellishments though, but I think her story is quite fantastic. Well, I think first they're women. I am quite, you know, very dismayed whenever I see African women portrayed as weak, and, you know, because I've not really met any African woman who's weak.
Yeah.
Most of the people that I know who are close to me are fearless and innovative, and, you know, take into account circumstances that they face and try and, you know, overcome them. And I think these three women, even though they have been sort of immortalized in sort of plays and dramas, I don't think enough gets said about them. So, you know, you look at the history books, even this history of West Africa, most of the people who are mentioned by name are men. So you've got Idris Aluma, you've got say Tutu, you've got, you know, the different Obas of Benin, because there are lots and lots of them. But you know, very few women get mentioned. But we know that it's, you know, it's not historical that, you know, women were not at the background of things. It's just that in some cases they say, well, they mention a title without mentioning the woman's name. And I think that's not the right way to record history.